Zalta, thank you so much for joining us today and at short notice. I really enjoyed our conversation recently where you shared about your experience and your expertise. And I know that's why everybody is here today. So welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Jane. It's really nice to be here today.
No, pleasure. So if you'd like to connect with Zalta on LinkedIn, please do. She is on LinkedIn. And I said to her, I love her photo. Her photo is just so natural. In
No
her
makeup.
photo, her hair, actually, your hair looks more like mine in your photo.
It does indeed.
It's more the messy look. But yeah, she is their group head talent at the Alpha Wave group. So we'll ask Zalta to tell us a little bit more about her story before she starts telling us about her expertise from startups to scale-ups. So please do connect with her on LinkedIn. Please do connect with me. And please do share your LinkedIn profile in our chat box if you want other people to connect with you too. We would love that. So Zalta, please let's start off with you telling us about your story. I know you said you've been in HR in tech for 14 years and you love it, and that's
Yep.
where you intend to stay. So please tell us how you got into it and how you got to love it so much.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to be here. I just said to Jane, I'm a little bit nervous, but it's really good to see all of you and meet all of you. So my name is Zalta Kelbrick, and I've been working as an HR practitioner since 2009 after my studies. And then I started working in retail for a long time, and then I only moved into the tech space in 2017. And I'm still in the tech space where I'm currently the group head of human capital development at the Alpha Wave Group. So just to give you a short summary of what the Alpha Wave Group is all about, we are a tech investment company, and we have 7 portfolio companies in our group. And my job is to support these portfolio companies in the group from an HR perspective. And they all tech companies, so they all build their own products. We have more than 170 plus engineers, and we dabble in different technologies like speech analytics, AI, VR, speech recognition, radars. So that is my short introduction. And as Jane said, I've been working in the tech industry, and it's a big passion of mine. I believe that's the future. So I will be staying in the tech space. I think probably for the rest of my career and as an HR practitioner. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. It's wonderful that you found what you love early
Yeah.
on, Zalta, and there's time to grow in that, dabble in that more, develop in that more. So you said that you've worked with startups and scale-ups. So tell us a little bit, please, about what do you love about startups and what do you love about scale-ups? And then after that, we'll move into what don't you love about startups and what don't you love about scale-ups?
Yeah, I think the startup environment is a super exciting environment. I must say, I don't think it's for everyone. The same with scale ups. There's a lot that happens in those growth phases of different businesses. I mean, you have your people that start investing in these businesses, these founders, and they're so passionate and they believe that this product are going to work completely. And then they need to start scaling up, and it becomes a different story where they now need to find teams that can grow with them, and it's not always as easy. So I like the excitement around startups and scale ups. There's a lot of room to grow with them and implement new things. So I also know it's not for everyone. I've worked with people where they prefer a little bit more structure and processes, where I enjoy implementing those and working with these founders to build businesses. So I think that is my love for the tech startups and growing to scale ups and then profitable eventually. Yeah.
Zalta, I'm curious to know what in your view happens to the culture in a company when it moves from a startup to a scale-up?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Jane. Uh, Change is the only constant thing. If not anything in life really, and it's very difficult for people to accept change. I think we tend to forget how difficult it is.
Mm.
And and you can imagine if you're a company of 5 people, and we've had that in a few of our portfolio companies where they start very small and then they grow to like 20, 25. Even if they grow from 5 to 15, there's just a lot of new personalities joining a company like that. There is different ways of thinking. There's different skill sets that joins a company. So I think the fundamentals can still be the same, but the way I say the way you have to think about your company and your culture, it needs to be adaptable and it needs to be flexible to accommodate all of the growth in the company, all of these different personalities and people. I mean, people come from different backgrounds, especially in our industry, it's still very male driven. So, but females are moving in more in the specific field, having females in your company. So there's definitely a culture switch, I would say. But that's something that you establish as you grow. I don't think it needs to change dramatically, but I do think there's definitely change that does happen that you need to be open for when you grow from startup to scale up.
Mm.
Yeah.
So when you
They
talk
always talk
about
about, sorry, no, go ahead.
no, when you talked about the needs, there's different ways of thinking and different skill sets, and you've mentioned change being the only constant. So I'm wondering about when you're hiring for scale-ups as opposed to startups or with both, do you specifically look for that in the people that you're hiring, that ability to thrive with change or manage change?
So I do think when I started working in this group, I realized that was something that founders, not all founders, I'm talking about specifically the experience that I've had, is that they don't think about that. They don't think about the changes and the cultural changes and the different skill sets that they do need. So what happens a lot in these smaller startup companies, it's because everyone wears so many hats that they just push these people into different roles and just employ new people as they think. They don't think about really what they want to achieve. And that becomes difficult. I think now that we've been through it and we know that you really need to think about when you do scale up, that you need to think about these business people that needs to enter these startups and think about it differently. Yeah, I hope I answered your question correctly.
Yeah. Well, you're saying that you haven't necessarily noticed that people are specifically targeting ability to thrive under change or manage change as a competency required for a role or to fit into a culture. But you're also saying that what I'm hearing you say is that in the startup, it's almost like everyone pitches in and just does whatever is needed. And then as it scales, there has to be more of a strategy and more of an alignment to the strategy in terms of who you hire and which skills you select. So
Yeah,
I'm
definitely.
wondering if I've heard you correctly there.
Yes, no, definitely. Yeah, because you don't want to just move people in different roles because there's a role open, and you
Mm,
almost set them up for failure then.
mm,
Um, Not all technical people are good business people or good leaders. So suddenly it then becomes where you have to manage people and you have to be a businessman or woman where you need to lead a business and think about business decisions as well. You can't just
mm,
delve into the technical world. um,
mm,
so I think that's definitely something that's why I think the strategy is so important. What do we want to achieve, and do we
mm,
have the right people to grow this and scale up this company
mm.
from where we are currently at?
Okay, so if you're hiring tech people then for the initial kind of startup, then that person, you're saying not all tech people are good business people or people's people necessarily, and vice versa. But that person might need to be aware that they would be pushed into a role like that, even though they didn't sign up for it. And it's not necessarily something they can say no to. Whereas as the company grows, then you can be a bit more specific and say, okay, we're hiring you as a specialist in the tech space, and it's not going to involve people management or the business side. Can it be that clean, or is it still messy in the scale up?
I wish it was that clean. It's the ideal world for it to be that clean,
Yeah.
but it does still happen often, and it's not the end of the world. I think it's just something that you need to be very aware of as the leaders of the company.
Mm.
And also, we've had a situation where one of the founders realized that they're actually just not a good CEO. They had to move from like building product rather to being that CEO of that company. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty humble, I'd say, for someone to admit that and not just hold on
Has
to the
not happened a
title.
lot. Yeah, these people are so passionate about what they are building. It's difficult to let go, and it's not just them. I think with anyone, that when you really nurture and start something and baby something, it's difficult to let go and realize that your company is growing now. You might not be the best skill set that this company need at this point for this specific position, and what does.
Yeah, and I think you talk about, Zalta, that in a startup, someone almost feels like this is their baby. This is, they're nurturing something that they've almost given birth to. And I'm interested to know, I know I brought this up with you before, whether that impacts on the attitude of the hiring manager, that if they're used to having something that feels like their baby and their child and they're growing it, and now they need to start letting go and employing people who don't feel like family specifically. Do they behave differently in interviews? Is there a bit of a power struggle or an insecurity or I don't know, but I'm just imagining there might be emotions that come out in hiring managers that wouldn't be there before, when they feel like they're in control.
Yeah, I definitely do think so to some extent. I do think that it is, I mean, you need to hire now people that is better than you in certain parts of the business. I do think there's it takes a very specific individual to be open to the idea of, I'm going to employ teams that can make my business better. And this person might be better than even I am in terms of sales or marketing or HR or whatever the team needs at that point of view in your company. So yeah, I definitely do think it influences them in the way they do recruit. And that's why I always think it's good to have, even when you start with startups, for example, my role would be to assist these founders to hire the right people for the job, and not to be for them to be objective when they actually do the hirings, and not to just think about, okay, well, this is all mine and I don't want to really share it. So I do think it doesn't have an effect, and I do think and for some it doesn't. So I don't want to put everyone on this under the same umbrella. But I have seen it, and yeah, I think that's where HR practitioners can support startups to assist them in finding the right people for their teams. Yeah.
I think it takes, go for it.
No, I'm just thinking also, when you do employ for startups or to scale up, is once, like just that I've mentioned previously again, to think about the specific culture and person that you need in that business, because it's not for everyone. It's some people prefer that more structured environment, and to realize that if you join a startup that is becoming a scale up, it doesn't mean that everything is going to be in place. It means that you'll have to be super proactive. You'll need no micromanagement will happen. So yeah, I think that's something that hiring managers also think about when they do type of interviews for startups and scale-ups.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, Zalta.
Mm.
And I hear you speaking from experience, and as you speak, I almost can see your brain thinking back to different scenarios you've been in. And I'm sure there are areas that are confidential, and so we're not asking you to name names or company names or anything like that. But can you share with us about any examples of mistakes you've seen people make? Just to help those who are hiring in these scenarios to be able to learn from others' mistakes. So anything you've seen that you can kind of flag for others.
Yeah, I think mistakes is for me one of the best things. It sounds ridiculous, but my philosophy around that is from mistakes, we learn how to improve it going forward. So I've seen a lot of mistakes being made when it comes to hiring. I think one of them would definitely, as I've mentioned previously now, is to take someone from a very corporate background and trying to make it work in a startup scale-up environment. It can, obviously it's possible. It's not like it's not possible, but it just to be aware of that when you do the hiring process and the selection process, to ensure that that person will be able to fit in with a culture where everything is not set in stone. I think also to really think about the strategy before you do these hirings and see where the business are at and what it would need. So what also happens in startups is people just recruit and like we're growing. And then suddenly they get to a point where like, oh, we've got way too many people. We're not selling our product, or we're not selling our services. And now we sit with all this staff on the benches and they don't have any work. So I think that's something that should be really thought about, the strategy discussed with your team to make sure that alignment is correct. And then I think also just to be transparent to the rest of the team in terms of why you're hiring or why you're growing the team and the potential impact it would have on the team. So, and that's what I've also seen a lot, is where you bring in expertise from the outside and you don't explain it to the rest of the company. So that happens actually quite a bit, because it's engineers and they just want to build, and they don't understand the roles of support or business people in startups and scale-ups. So to really be transparent, we are, for example, getting a COO or a marketing person, and that's their role and that's what they will be responsible for. So that absolute transparency in a company. I mean, in our company, we talk about the finances, like we're doing very poorly or we're doing really well. So it's open to everyone. We employing this person and they will be doing this and this and this. Yeah, so I think those are the mistakes that I've seen that if I had to think back, I would have recommended to do it differently. And sorry, Jane, my last thing is
no, please share more.
is to not just move people in positions that they are not suitable for. For example, if you take someone, and this is now happening, just one of our examples that I'm using from our company is a data scientist, and we've moved him into a technical product owner role. Is the way things is super complicated, and now he's been moved into a role where he needs to simplify things to explain to developers what they need to develop. And it's not even his fault, but the role was not right for that person, but he was already in the company. So that happens a lot, where you just move someone over to another role because it's open. So to just make sure that the skill sets that you implement is the correct people with the correct skill sets. Yeah. So I think that would be my biggest. I had to think about mistakes. That would probably be the biggest mistakes. made as a company.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Zalta, because as you say, it has an impact on the company because the person has moved into a role that isn't right for them, that isn't right for the organization. And there's an organizational perspective. And I think having been in recruitment for so many years, I also see the impact on the individual because now the individual is in a role where they're not thriving. Often I see people losing confidence. They are perceived as less competent. They almost get worked out of the company sometimes. Now somebody takes a reference on them and the reference isn't great. So it can really impact an individual's career trajectory by moving them into the wrong role as well. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's such a key point.
Yeah, that's that's obviously not just in startups. I just think it happens more often in startups because everyone wears different hats, and when they scale, then you just move the next person into the next possible role. But it happens actually everywhere, and I think that's the worst thing you can do for someone is to set them up for failure by putting them in the wrong role.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what you said. It's not even their mistake. But for the rest of their life, they need to probably go with that. And yeah, series. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another point you made, you said it's so important for people to talk about the why they're hiring someone else, especially, for example, if it's a group of engineers and now you're hiring somebody in marketing, that they could be thinking, why is that important? Or how is that role as important as mine? So yeah, please tell us more about that.
Yeah, and I've seen that a lot, and that's if I work with these different companies, I think that's one of the biggest things that support staff does raise, and that engineers don't understand them. They don't understand what they're doing, and they feel left out. And specifically in a group where we are focused on engineers and building product, these support people, they do tend to feel almost left out because the engineers don't understand the importance of this role. And I'm not saying everyone. In startups, it's also just it's a bit of a crazy dynamic. Everyone just goes and builds and they can't think about anything else. They just need to get the product out and sell it. But what we've realized now is, and I think that's why our model works so really well, is that we can support these teams from the outside and go in and support them from marketing, sales, HR perspective. But yeah, so really taking that time to make everyone in the company feel like they belong, and the reasons why is so important, because you can't. I remember I was working at Food Lovers head office when I was a graduate still, and the CEO there, Brian Coppin, very wise CEO, he said to me, you can have a bakery and you can have a baker, but without the confectioner and the counter hand and all of those, that was now his frame of reference, you can't run that bakery successful. And so you need everyone on board. And that stuck with me. It's just like, sure, that you have the baker, that's probably the main person, but you can't run the entire bakery if it doesn't have the support of the rest. And he understands why they're also important. I think that's what we need to do with our teams, is make them understand why the rest of the teams are so important and why we're hiring them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that impacts on how that person gets treated as a colleague, as an employee. So yeah, that's really key. Thank you, Zalta. I see there's a question from Andrew in the chat that I'm going to read. If you could please share your thoughts on it. He says, going from startup to scale up, did you find challenges in finding the right people? How do you assess developers? Do you only assess developers? How do you assess developers? Do you only assess developers based on their ability to develop? Or do you look at culture fit and team fit as well?
Yeah, so I think it's a bit different when you build your own product like this specific company, but I've worked in a consultation company as well. And I think there was a time especially during COVID, that time where if you were a developer, you were hired. If you just had the developer job title somewhere around your name, then you were like offered big salaries and stuff. I do think it's easier today to find good developers or engineers. So I call them engineers because you can have a self-taught developer that teaches themselves, and then engineers where we only employ people with degrees specifically. That is qualified engineers, electronic engineers, or data scientists. Sorry, Jane, just repeat the entire question because I get so passionate and then I just forget about exactly.
Sure, no problem, no problem. So going from startup to scale up, did you find challenges in finding the right people? And how do you assess developers? Do you only assess them based on their ability to develop? Or do you look at the culture fit and team fit as well?
Okay, let me answer the first part. So we haven't found it very difficult to find people specifically for our company, but I know that it's a big challenge out there, specifically because we're competing against markets, not just internationally, but in South Africa, like Takealot pays big salaries. I hope there's no one here from Offers-in. Though I love them, there's also they create this salary trajectories for these young generations, which startups really just can't afford. That's why I think you have to sell it differently. Startups, you should almost sell it in terms of you are work on exciting things. You get to learn more than it's focused on money or salary, and salary can become one thing once you have the experience. And then, okay, the second part of that question is how it affects
yeah, do you look at their culture fit and their team fit?
How we screen them,
as well as their ability to develop, yeah.
So with any position, I believe there should always be some sort of technical assessment. It's just difficult to really assess someone from even if you have some sort of competency-based interview. I think most people do assessment. We used to write our own assessments, and then we have the person comes in, and we will have them sit there and make sure it's their work, because we've always also seen where people just use someone else's work. I mean, I'm not against using any form of Googling, or I think that's part of learning. So yeah, and I do think the culture, we definitely look at culture. I mean, that comes back to putting someone in a company where there is certain ways of doing things and they just really don't fit in. With the tech startup, it's different because people get to sit at home and do their work. But we try and build culture where people still socialize. And that's, if you look at Generation Z, for example, there's still a big need to socialize. They want the flexibility, but they want to be able to socialize. So I think nothing should be just taken as it shouldn't just be the academic or how the recruitment or the interview process went. I think it should be a combination of all of it when you make your decision. Like, if you think about the culture fit is important. Like, if you get someone from a super corporate company coming to a startup, they might not be able to fit in because it's too many hats. And
apart from the hats, I see there was a in conversation there, Andrew was saying that that's a lot to ask in one question. So, but he was saying, so thank you for that. But and just to follow up on that, in terms of recruiting people, do you find that there's a generational impact on culture in terms of you find that certain generations I mean, I know we're stereotyping here as well. You know, not everyone is the same just based on their generation. There's so many factors. But do you end up having a mix of generations in the workforce?
Yeah, I mean, I am amazed by these new younger generations coming into the workplace and
Mm-hmm.
the knowledge that they have and the knowledge that they are able to give and what they know already and how hard they are willing to work. So I know there's a lot of talk that this generation is lazy and they don't want to really work, but I've seen a different side where I think it's super important. I'm very passionate about these younger people. Not that I'm old, but but there's definitely by far one of the older people at my company. So and I'm only 38, so it definitely, I think it's exciting. It brings a different perspective and makes you think about things in a different way. And they have
Nice. So
these.
you enjoy the mix, and
I
you
love
see,
it.
and I like the way that you see a lot of, I mean, there's really not many people who say positive things about the younger generations and Gen Z and millennials. So thanks for that, Zalta.
Yeah, I think it's good to have so if you think about like specifically our company, our founders and our senior people is definitely needed. That's always a thing. And I think with the younger people, I mean, there's a lot of training that still needs to be done. And time needs to be put in, effort needs to put into their work. But it's amazing to see what they can achieve, much more than we can ever think of. It's remarkable.
Yeah, I think diversity is important.
Yeah.
And I see Michael has also added there, because in the beginning you said sometimes there's that, one of the mistakes that can get made is hiring a lot of people and then realizing, oh my goodness, we actually don't need all of these people. Now we don't have enough work for all the people we have, and now we need to let them go. And Michael made a comment that sometimes that could be even within 6 months of hiring someone. So how have you, I don't know if you've had to, or how can you, or how have you handled the emotional impact of this, of the letting people go when you recruited them more recently and now they're not needed for the 6? Yeah.
It's always a difficult one. I mean, at the end of the day, we're still there to build a business, right? And we still need to make profit and to keep the wheel going. I'm probably one of the less emotional HRs when it comes to those types of things. Obviously, that's why I think that transparency is so important to when you do the interview process, to let that young person or whoever you're interviewing say, we are still in startup phase. This might go completely south in 6 months. But when it happens, to make sure that there's constant feedback during the employment. So to say, geez, Zalta, I think it's not been looking good for the past 4 months that you've been employed. We might be scaling down in the next 2 months. I'm just making you aware of it. So they also have the potentially the opportunity to look for something else or have an open conversation or find different ways, consulting. I think being open and transparent about what's happening in your company, specifically at those phases, is important.
Yeah, I really like your emphasis on transparency, Zalta. I think that preempts a lot of it helps avoid a lot of problems that can arise when there's no transparency. So I love that golden thread that you're bringing through in your conversation. I see there's something else kind of that might be a transparency issue. How do you deal with, Iman says, how do you deal with situations where a business is bootstrapped? We have some challenges with senior leaders who are heavily involved in the daily operations. And he's keen to know your experience in this regard, and if you have any tips on how TA professionals can help them to let go a little bit?
I think I'm just trying to understand why are they keeping everything to themselves, and sometimes it's not, they don't do it because they want to do it, they actually just don't know how to let go. So that's actually my starting point for anything, is to have that conversation and be honest and say, we've realized that you're not letting go. Why aren't you letting go? These are the benefits of letting go, and what can we do to help you to get, but we want you to focus on more strategical work in the business. We want you to be more involved in processes, and yeah. So I think that's not the most uncommon thing. I think that happens naturally to senior people, is that they are so they are so passionate. They just want to operationally do everything, but to balance at least and say, okay, we understand that you want to operationally still be involved, but how can we help to take away 30% of that and give it to someone else and make sure that you can focus on more strategic things? Yeah, I think that's also part of change management and strategy, to understand what is expected from those senior roles. But even myself, I had a meeting with my CEO the other day, and I said to him, operationally, I'm very involved. So I do think specifically in our industry, it does happen, but have those conversations and let them understand where they're coming from and why it's so difficult for them, and then come up with a plan or a strategy to change that. But I think before you do that, understand why.
Yeah, again, I love your approach of transparency, of communicating directly. But along with that, it's not this aggressive attitude, Zalta. It's this, you really assume the best about people's intentions. And I think that really helps oil the wheels in change.
I always think of how, if it was me, how would someone to be able to treat me, or how I would like to be managed if it was me. So, and I think you can get quite far in life, specifically in the workplace, if conversations are dealt with correctly, and that goes south very quickly. Specifically for senior people, they have that sense of they want to be respected, they want to be seen. Yeah, so just to be sensitive.
No, I love that. I think it works in work and life.
In life,
it's a wonderful approach on all sides.
Any relationship. There we go.
Wherever there are relationships.
Yes.
So Zalta, I see we just have 5 minutes left. So we might have more questions, but before we go into that, what would your top 3 tips be to share from your experience for people who are hiring, for startups to scale ups? Yeah. Hiring managers, HR, anyone.
Okay, I feel like I'm repeating myself a bit, but I think number 1 is to always know change is not for everyone. It might be easy. It might be easy for your founders or leaders that's in the company, but it's not easy for everyone. And to manage that really well. Ensure that your recruitment process is aligned with your company strategy. Actually, your entire, don't see HR as just recruitment. It must be a whole, like what you start with should be in line with what the company's strategy are and what they are trying to achieve. And then, yeah, I think that transparency thing is for me so important. Like, even if it does not go well, be open to your teams. And when when there is wins, to share them as well. So I think, yeah, if I have to think about 3 things, I think those would be my top 3 things if I have to take this year on and think about things that I would want to implement more and be aware of when I actually work as a practitioner or as a consultant or whatever hat I'm wearing, a talent acquisition specialist. So yeah, I think those are my 3 things.
Oh, I love that. Thanks, Zalta. So we probably have time for this last question. We've got 3 minutes, and Iman says he's keen to understand how benchmarking works for small, medium businesses like ours, being an early scale up. So any advice you can give or tools they can use?
Benchmarking in terms of, is that in terms of salary or?
I'm not sure. Iman, maybe you can, I'll stop recording and then Iman, maybe you can unmute and share. So I
Salary.
see there's another message. Maybe it's in the chat. Salary, please. Yes, salary, he says.
I can tell you what what we do as a company. So I would, I will see what the market is doing first of all, in terms of. So I would take the positions and I would make sure that I understand exactly what the position requires in terms of your competencies, but also your skills, your qualification and years of experience. And then I will, for example, look at the market and see what they are doing for these specific positions. So let's take a developer. What are they being paid? Junior, intermediate, senior developers with brackets. So I will take this offers in report that is really good. There's a few of these reports that they send out, which I will then take and just compile some sort of sheet where I can see the benchmark. And then we use REM channel. So with REM channel, I have to say there's a lot of people that takes part in REM channel. So you have to also be aware that companies as big as, for example, Old Mutual or those bigger companies, they pay different salaries to startups companies. So then we try and also allocate some sort of definition to that specific position in our environment, small environment. And then they actually they tell you what these people are earning in the market. It is difficult, that's why I say your employee value, what do you call it? EVP.
Proposition?
And yes. It can't just be based on salaries when it comes to startups or scale ups. You need to think about what makes you so different from, and that could be anything, and what makes you different than just big salaries. So that's what we try and do is we give a lot of leave, for example. We give our junior people 25 days leave, or we have flexibility. We get them to work on great products. But so it is a difficult. Think of other ways than just salary.
I love that, Zalta. I think that's such a good point. And more, I do see people in the market, especially since COVID, looking for more than just money as part of the benefits or what they want to be able to get from their workplace, what it enables them to do in life outside of their work.
Definitely.
So thank you. I really do appreciate you joining us so much. Thank you for sharing your experience, your expertise, your tips. I know a lot of people are saying thank you. This was really helpful. They appreciate it. So thank you so much, Zalta. So please do connect with me, connect with Zalta. And we look forward to seeing you next month in our next virtual masterclass. So enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.